The Mojave Desert is a vast, silent sea of sand and stone, a land where the sun beats down without mercy and the wind whispers secrets that have been buried for centuries. It stretches across southeastern California, spilling into Nevada, Arizona, and Utah, 1,000 miles of hard, brittle earth that seems to reject all life. But life has always found a way here, and so have roads. There is one road in particular, a forgotten road, that cuts through the heart of this desert like a scar that has long since healed over. It is not on any modern map, not in any GPS system, and most people who speed along the interstate have no idea it exists. But it is there, a faint line of cracked asphalt and gravel, slowly being swallowed by the sand. This is the story of that road, and the people who traveled it, and the ghosts that still walk its length on moonless nights. To understand this forgotten road, you have to go back more than 100 years, to a time when the Mojave was not a place to be crossed in a few hours in an air-conditioned car, but a barrier that could take weeks to traverse, a place that could kill you if you made a single mistake. In the late 1800s, the Mojave was a wilderness of pure extremity. Summer temperatures could climb past 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Water was scarce, and the few springs and wells were often alkaline and poisonous. The land itself seemed to conspire against anyone foolish enough to try to cross it, yet cross it they did. Gold prospectors, cattle drovers, Mormon settlers, and all manner of dreamers and desperados pushed westward, following trails that had been used for thousands of years by the indigenous peoples who called this desert home. The forgotten road we're talking about began as one of those native trails, a footpath used by the Mojave people to travel between the Colorado River and the Pacific coast. They knew every water hole, every shady canyon, every place where the desert would yield a little mercy. They traveled light and moved with the seasons, but when white settlers arrived, they saw the trail differently. They saw a route, a potential highway for wagons and stagecoaches, a way to connect the growing cities of the East with the golden promise of California. And so they took that ancient footpath and widened it, graded it, and turned it into a road that would carry thousands of people into the unknown. The road was never given a grand name. It was simply called the Mojave Road, or sometimes the Old Government Road, because it was used by the U.S. Army to move supplies and troops between forts. It ran from the Colorado River near present-day Needles, California, all the way to Cajon Pass, where it connected to the road that led down to Los Angeles. It was not a road in the way we think of roads today. There was no pavement, no guardrails, no road signs. It was just a pair of wagon ruts worn into the earth, sometimes so deep that the wheels would lock and the wagon would tip. In some places, the road was wide enough for 2 wagons to pass, but in others, it narrowed to a single track that hugged the edge of a wash or climbed a steep, rocky slope. The people who traveled this road were a strange and varied lot. There were families heading west to start new lives, their wagons piled high with furniture, seeds, tools, and children. There were miners hauling ore from the distant hills to the railheads. There were cattle drovers pushing herds of longhorns through the desert, losing dozens of animals to thirst and heat. There were soldiers on horseback, their uniforms gray with dust, their eyes scanning the horizon for Apache or outlaws. And there were the lonely travelers, the ones with sad stories and empty pockets, who walked the road on foot, carrying everything they owned on their backs. They all passed over the same stretch of earth, their footsteps adding to the great, unmarked grave of the desert. The journey was brutal. A typical wagon trip from the Colorado River to Cajon Pass took 12 to 15 days, and that was if everything went right. If a wheel broke or an ox died or the water ran out, the trip could stretch into weeks, and sometimes it ended with a shallow grave beside the road. The desert was littered with the skeletons of animals and the rusted remains of wagons. There are stories of families who set out with high hopes and were found months later, dead of thirst, their wagons abandoned, their belongings scattered by the wind. The Mojave Road was not a highway to opportunity. It was a gauntlet of suffering, and only the toughest or luckiest made it through. One of the most famous stories from the Mojave Road is the story of the Mormon pioneers who traveled it in the 1850s. Brigham Young, the leader of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, had sent a group of missionaries to California, and they returned with tales of a fertile land. But the route they took, known as the Mormon Trail, crossed the Mojave at its worst point. In the summer of 1851, a party of 500 men, women, and children set out from Salt Lake City, hoping to establish a settlement in Southern California. They brought with them hundreds of cattle and wagons loaded with supplies, but the desert was not kind. Water was scarce, and the animals began to die. The heat was unbearable, and the people grew weak. By the time they reached the Colorado River, More than half their cattle were dead, and many of the people were sick. They pushed on, following the Mojave Road westward, but the desert had more horrors in store. A group of Mojave warriors attacked them, killing several pioneers and stealing cattle. The survivors stumbled into Los Angeles in a state of exhaustion and desperation. The settlement they had dreamed of never materialized. All that is left of their journey are a few scattered graves and the memory of their suffering. But not all the stories are so grim. There are also tales of resilience and kindness. The Mojave people, despite being attacked by the settlers, sometimes helped the travelers. They knew the desert better than anyone, and they would guide lost parties to water or share food with starving families. There was a famous watering hole called Soda Lake, a dry lake bed where groundwater had pushed up through the salt crust, forming pools that were barely drinkable but saved many lives. Travelers would stop there to rest and water their animals, and they would often find others doing the same. Campfires would spring up, and strangers would share stories and supplies. It was a place of community in the middle of nowhere, a brief respite from the loneliness of the road. The Forgotten Road had its own landmarks, natural features that the travelers used as guideposts. There was a giant rock formation called the Castle, a pile of volcanic boulders that looked like the ruins of an ancient fortress. There was the Lava Tube, a long underground tunnel formed by an ancient lava flow, where travelers could escape the heat of the day. There was the Paiute Range, a jagged line of mountains that seemed to float on the horizon, always just out of reach. And there was the Mojave River, a strange river that flowed not on the surface but underground, its presence marked by a line of cottonwood trees that grew along its hidden course. These landmarks were the only certainty in a landscape that could shift and change with the wind. As the years passed, the road changed too. By the early 1900s, the automobile had arrived, and the Mojave Road became one of the first routes for motorists crossing the desert. The old wagon tracks were widened and graded, and in some places, a thin layer of gravel was laid down. Cars replaced wagons, and the journey that once took 2 weeks could now be done in a couple of days. But the desert was still dangerous. Radiators boiled over, tires blew out, and engines seized up in the heat. Many early motorists carried extra water not just for themselves but for their cars. There are stories of people who set out on the Mojave Road in their shiny new automobiles, only to be found days later, their cars broken down, their passengers near death. The road had not become safe, it had simply become faster. In the 1920s, a new road was built, a paved highway that bypassed much of the old route. This was Route 66, the famous Mother Road that would later be romanticized in songs and movies. Route 66 followed a different path through the Mojave, staying closer to the railroad and the new towns that were springing up. The old Mojave Road was gradually abandoned. The new road was faster and smoother, and it had gas stations and diners and motels. The old road became a forgotten road, a relic of a bygone era. The wagon ruts were overgrown with creosote bushes. The watering holes dried up or were polluted. The names of the landmarks faded from memory, but the road never really died. It is still there if you know where to look. Today, it is a dirt track used by off-road enthusiasts and history buffs. A few hardy souls still drive it, but most of them are not trying to cross the desert. They are just exploring a piece of the past. They find old bottles, rusted cans, and the remains of wagons and cars. They see the graves of people who died along the way, marked by simple stones or iron crosses. They feel the heat and the silence, and they imagine what it must have been like to travel this road when it was the only way. The Forgotten Road is more than just a piece of history. It is a place where time seems to stand still. If you walk its length, you can still see the marks of the wheels that passed over it 150 years ago. You can still find the stones that travelers piled up to mark the way. You can still feel the presence of the people who came before, their hopes and fears lingering in the air like the dust that settles on everything. It is a lonely place, but it is not empty. The desert remembers, and so does the road. In the next part of this episode, we will travel deeper into the heart of the Mojave, following the Forgotten Road as it winds through canyons and across dry lake beds. We will meet the people who still live there, the descendants of the pioneers and the Mojave people, and we will hear their stories. We will explore the abandoned ghost towns that grew up along the road, towns that were born in a burst of mining fever and died in a long, slow decline. We will also look at the forces of nature that are slowly erasing the road, the wind and the rain and the encroaching sand that have already swallowed entire sections of it. And we will ask the question, why does a road get forgotten? Is it simply because a better road came along, or is it something more, something about the way we choose to remember and forget the places that shaped us? But before we go any further, let us take a moment to picture that road as it is today. It is early morning, just before sunrise, and you are standing at a point where the road crosses a dry wash. The air is cool, almost cold, but you know that within a few hours, the heat will be unbearable. The road ahead of you is a faint line of light brown dirt, barely visible against the darker gravel of the wash. On either side, the desert stretches out in a flat expanse of creosote and Joshua trees. The sky is a deep blue that is just beginning to lighten at the eastern horizon. You hear nothing but the wind, a low, continuous sound that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere. You take a step forward, and the gravel crunches under your feet. It is a small sound, but in this silence, it is like a gunshot. Off to your left, you see a small pile of rocks that someone has stacked into a cairn. It is old, the rocks weathered and covered with dark desert varnish, a thin coating of manganese and iron that forms over decades. You walk over and look at it. There is no inscription, no marker, just the stones. You wonder who built it and why. Was it a traveler marking the trail? Was it a grave? Or was it something else, a piece of silent communication between strangers who would never meet? You will never know, but the cairn remains, a witness to everything that has passed this way. A few yards further on, you find a piece of rusted metal half buried in the dirt. You pull it out. It is part of a wagon wheel, the iron rim bent and broken, the wooden spokes long since rotted away. It must have been lying here for more than a century. You imagine the wagon that carried it, the family that sat on the seat, the oxen that pulled it. You think about the day the wheel broke, the hours of labor to fix it, the sweat and the swearing and the desperate hope that the next spring would have water. And then you put the wheel back where you found it because it belongs here in this place on this forgotten road. As the sun rises, the light changes everything. The shadows shrink, the colors shift, and the desert comes alive. A jackrabbit darts across the road, its long ears bouncing. A lizard scampers up a rock. A hawk circles overhead, its cry piercing the silence. This is a place of harsh beauty, a landscape that has no use for sentimentality. It is what it is, and it has always been what it is. The road is just a line of human intention drawn across its surface, a mark that nature is slowly erasing. But the road was never just a line on a map. It was a thread of connection, a lifeline that linked people across an unforgiving land. It was a place where strangers became friends, where dreams were born and died, where the best and worst of human nature were laid bare. It was a road of hope and heartbreak, and it deserves to be remembered, not for its grandeur, but for its ordinariness. It was a road that ordinary people traveled, ordinary people who faced extraordinary challenges and somehow found the strength to keep going. And so we begin our journey along the forgotten road through the Mojave Desert. We will walk in the footsteps of those who came before, listening for their voices in the wind. We will follow the faint traces of their passage, the broken tools and the scattered stones, the names carved into rocks. We will try to understand what drove them to cross this desert and what they left behind. And in the end, we may discover that the road is not forgotten at all. It is just waiting for someone to remember it. We start where the road leaves the wash and climbs onto a flat terrace covered with volcanic rocks. The surface is rough and uneven, and the tires of modern vehicles have left fresh tracks in the sand, but they do not last long. The wind will erase them within a week. The old road itself is harder to erase. It has been here for over a century, and though the elements have battered it, the path remains. You can see it winding ahead, a faint depression in the earth, lined with the same dark rocks that the travelers piled up to mark the way. These are the Mojave Desert's original signposts, and they still stand, silent and patient, waiting for someone to read them. As you walk, you begin to notice the small details that tell the story of this road. Here, a piece of broken glass, its edges smoothed by years of wind and sand. It was once a bottle, perhaps a whiskey bottle left by a teamster, or a medicine bottle from a family's trunk. You pick it up and hold it to the light. The glass is thick and green, tinted with the impurities of early manufacturing. It feels cool in your hand, and you imagine the hand that last held it, a hand that was tired and dirty and hopeful. You put it back because it is part of the road's story, not yours to take. Further on, you come across a cluster of creosote bushes that have grown together in a rough circle. In the center of the circle, there is a flat stone, and on the stone, someone has placed a small pile of pebbles. It is a modern offering, a sign that someone else has been here, someone who felt the same pull of the past. You add a pebble of your own, a small act of connection across time. Then you move on. The road dips into a shallow canyon, and the walls rise up on either side. The canyon is narrow, barely wide enough for a wagon, and the floor is covered with sand that makes every step heavy. The walls are layered with ancient rock, red and brown and gray, and you can see the marks of water that once flowed here, carving the canyon over thousands of years. But now the water is rare, and the canyon is dry. The only sound is the crunch of your boots on the sand. In the canyon, the heat feels more intense. The walls reflect the sun and the air is still. You stop for a moment to rest and take a drink of water. As you stand there, you notice a carving on the canyon wall. It is a name deeply etched into the rock, C.T. Smith 1890. There is no date of death, no message, just a name and a year. Who was C.T. Smith? Was he a prospector, a pioneer, a soldier? Did he make it to the other side? You will never know, but the carving is a reminder that this road was not just a route. It was a record of lives lived and journeys made. You continue through the canyon, and the road becomes fainter. In some places, it has been washed out by flash floods, and you have to pick your way around boulders and debris. The travelers of old faced the same challenges, and they had no choice but to stop and clear a path or find a way around. It was slow work and dangerous. The canyon walls could trap the heat, and a broken leg could mean death. After an hour, the canyon opens up into a wide, dry lake bed. The lake bed is flat and white, baked hard as concrete by the sun. In the distance, you can see the mountains, shimmering in the heat. The road crosses the lake bed in a straight line, heading directly toward those mountains. On the lake bed, the heat is relentless. There is no shade, no wind, just the glaring white surface that reflects the sun's rays back at you. The old travelers called such places dry lakes, and they were both a blessing and a curse. The flat surface was easy to cross, but the lack of water and the blinding glare could drive a person mad. You walk across the lake bed, your footsteps leaving no mark on the hard surface. The silence is complete. You can hear your own heartbeat. You think about the people who crossed this lake bed 100 years ago, their wagons creaking, their animals gasping. They would have looked at the same mountains, seen the same shimmering heat, and wondered if they would make it. Near the far edge of the lake bed, you see a small wooden cross stuck into the ground. It is weathered and cracked, the wood bleached white by the sun. There is no name, but the cross is clearly a grave marker. You stop and bow your head. Someone died here on this barren lake bed under this unforgiving sun. Perhaps it was a child or an old man or a woman in childbirth. The cross is a simple testimony to the cost of crossing this desert. You leave the lake bed and enter a region of rolling hills covered with Joshua trees. The Joshua trees are like sentinels, their twisted branches pointing in all directions. They are a signature of the Mojave, and they seem to watch you as you walk. The road here is more distinct, because the Joshua trees themselves serve as markers. The travelers often tied rags or placed stones at the base of the trees to mark the way. You can still see some of those stones, half buried in the sand. In this area, you come across the ruins of an old stage station. All that remains is a low stone wall, a few feet high, and the outline of a foundation. The station was a place of rest and refuge, a place where travelers could get water, food, and a change of horses. It was also a place of communication, where news and gossip were exchanged. The stagecoaches that passed through here carried mail, gold, and people. The station was operated by a family or a group of men who lived in constant isolation. They had to be tough and resourceful, and they had to survive on whatever the desert provided. You walk among the ruins, stepping carefully. You find a fragment of a ceramic plate with a blue flower pattern still visible. You find a rusted horseshoe and a piece of leather that might have been part of a harness. These are the remnants of a life that was lived right here, in this remote outpost. You imagine the station keeper, a man with a grizzled beard and a worn hat, sitting on the stone wall, watching the horizon for the dust cloud that signaled an approaching stage. You imagine the passengers, dusty and exhausted, climbing down from the coach and stretching their legs. You imagine the voices, the laughter, the cursing, the prayers. And then you imagine the day the station was abandoned, when the new road bypassed it and the silence returned. The ruins are now just stones, but they hold the memory of that life. The wind whispers through the cracks, and if you listen closely, you can almost hear the sounds of the past. But the desert does not hold onto those sounds forever. It lets them fade, one by one, until all that is left is the silence. You leave the station and continue along the road. The hills give way to a vast plain covered with creosote and bursage. The road is a thin line of dirt that seems to go on forever, disappearing into the heat haze. You walk for miles, and the landscape does not change. The only sign of life is an occasional hawk circling overhead or a lizard darting into a bush. The heat is oppressive, and you feel the weight of the miles. This is the desert that the early travelers knew, a desert of endless sameness, where every mile looks like the last, and the only thing that keeps you going is the hope that the next mile will be different. But the desert is not as empty as it seems. Beneath the surface there is water, though it is hidden deep. The creosote bushes have roots that go down 30 feet to reach it. The Joshua trees store water in their trunks. The desert is a place of hidden resources, and the travelers had to learn to find them. They knew where to dig for water, which plants were edible, and how to read the signs of rain. You stop for lunch under the shade of a creosote bush. The shade is thin, barely enough to offer relief, but it is better than the full sun. You eat a simple meal of crackers and dried fruit, and you think about what the travelers ate. They carried flour, bacon, beans, and coffee. They hunted rabbits and doves when they could. They made bread over an open fire. It was a monotonous diet, but it sustained them. As you sit there, you notice something in the sand a few feet away. It is a small piece of metal, half buried. You dig it out with your fingers. It is a badge, the kind worn by a railroad worker or a stagecoach driver. It is corroded and barely legible, but you can make out the letters SB and the number 7. It must have belonged to a man who worked for the Southern Pacific Railroad, perhaps a conductor or a brakeman. How did it end up here, miles from any railroad track? Maybe it fell off a wagon that was carrying supplies to a remote station. Maybe it was lost by a man who was walking to the next town. You slip the badge into your pocket, not as a souvenir, but as a piece of evidence, a clue to the lives that passed this way. The afternoon sun is brutal. You decide to rest until the heat eases, but the desert has other plans. A dust devil appears on the horizon, a spinning column of dust and sand. It moves across the plain, growing larger, and you watch it with a mix of fear and fascination. The dust devils are common in the Mojave, especially in the afternoon. They can be harmless, but they can also be dangerous if they pick up rocks or debris. You crouch behind a bush and cover your face. The dust devil passes about 100 yards away, whipping up sand that stings your skin. It leaves behind a pile of dead tumbleweeds and a thin layer of dust on everything. When the dust devil has passed, you stand up and continue walking. The road is now covered with a layer of fine sand, and you can barely see it. You rely on the landmarks you have memorized, a distant mountain peak, a cluster of tall rocks the shape of the horizon. The travelers did the same thing, using the stars and the landforms to navigate. They had no GPS, no maps with contour lines. They had a few landmarks and a lot of faith. As the sun begins to set, the road becomes clearer again. The long shadows of the evening bring the landscape into sharp relief. You see a line of dark rocks that mark an ancient lava flow, and you realize that the road is leading you directly toward them. You pick up your pace, hoping to reach the rocks before dark. The desert at night is a different place, beautiful but treacherous. The temperature drops quickly, and the darkness can disorient even the most experienced traveler. You reach the lava flow just as the last light of day fades. The rocks are black and jagged, piled up in chaotic heaps. The road winds through them, following a narrow passage that was carefully chosen by the early surveyors. You find a flat spot among the rocks and set up your camp. You are protected from the wind, but the rocks radiate the heat they absorbed during the day, and the ground is warm to the touch. You build a small fire, using dry creosote branches that burn with a bright flame and a pungent smell. The fire crackles and pops, and the light dances off the black rocks. You sit there, looking up at the stars. The sky is clear, and the stars are so bright you feel like you can reach out and touch them. The Milky Way stretches across the sky like a river of light. It is a sight that every traveler who passed this way would have seen: the same stars, the same hills, the same sense of being small and alone in the vastness of the desert. You think about the people who camped here before you. Perhaps a band of Mojave Indians traveling from the Colorado River to the coast. Perhaps a Spanish explorer looking for a route to California. Perhaps a Mormon pioneer fleeing persecution. Perhaps a gold seeker desperate for fortune. Each of them sat around a fire like this, under these same stars, and felt the same wonder and fear. In the morning, you wake to the cold light of dawn. The fire has gone out, and the air is crisp. You pack up your camp and continue along the road. Today, you will reach the summit of a low pass that leads into the next valley. The road climbs steadily, and the vegetation changes. The creosote yields to Joshua trees, and the Joshua trees yield to junipers and pines. You are entering a higher elevation, and the air is easier to breathe. At the top of the pass, you stop and look back. The desert stretches out behind you, a vast expanse of brown and green and gray. You can see the route you have traveled, the faint line of the road winding through the landscape. It looks so small, so fragile from up here, and yet it has survived for so long. You think about the forces that are trying to erase it: the wind that fills the ruts with sand, the rain that carves new channels, the plants that grow over the tracks. But the road persists because it is more than just a physical path. It is a story etched into the earth, and stories do not die easily. You turn and face the other side. The road descends into a new valley, a valley that holds the ruins of a mining town. You can see the remnants of buildings, the tailings piles, the rusted machinery. This town was born in the 1870s after a silver strike drew hundreds of prospectors. It grew quickly, with a saloon, a general store, a hotel, and a post office. It had its own newspaper, its own school, its own cemetery. For a few years, it was a bustling community, a place where people came to make their fortune. But the silver ran out and the town died. The people left one by one until only a handful remained. Then they left too. The buildings fell into disrepair. The roofs collapsed, the walls crumbled, the desert reclaimed the streets. Now all that is left are the shells of buildings, the rusted cans, the broken bottles. The cemetery is still there, the graves marked with wooden crosses and stone slabs. Some of the inscriptions are still legible. Died of fever 1880. Killed in a mine accident 1885. Infant daughter of John and Mary 1879. They are the stories of lives lived and lost in this forgotten town. You walk through the ruins and you feel the weight of history. This town was a dream that didn't last. But for a few years it was real. People loved here, hated here, worked here, died here. They built a community in the middle of a desolate landscape, and they made it work until it didn't work anymore. The road that brought them here also took them away, and now the road itself is fading. As you leave the ghost town, you notice a section of the road that has been completely erased. A flash flood has carved a deep gully right across the path, and the road disappears into the chasm. You have to detour around it, climbing down into the gully and up the other side. The detour is rough and you lose sight of the road for a few hundred feet, but you find it again on the other side, a faint line of dirt leading onward. This is the reality of the forgotten road. It is not a continuous path. It is a series of traces, some more visible than others, some completely lost. The road is a puzzle, a challenge, a mystery. It asks you to pay attention, to look for the signs, to use your knowledge and your instincts. It rewards you with a sense of connection to the past, but it also reminds you that nothing lasts forever. The sun is high now, and the heat is building. You find a spot under a large Joshua tree and rest. You drink water and eat a snack. You look at the badge you found yesterday, running your thumb over the corroded metal. You wonder if the man who wore it ever made it home. You wonder if anyone remembers his name. The afternoon passes slowly. You continue walking, following the road as it winds through the valley. You pass the remains of a stone corral, a place where travelers kept their animals overnight. You find a pile of rusted cans, discarded by some long-gone camp. You find a single boot, its leather cracked and dry. At the end of the valley, the road begins to climb again, leading toward a distant pass that will take you into the final stretch of the Mojave. The sun is setting, and the sky is painted in shades of orange and red and purple. The desert is beautiful in this light, every rock and bush glowing with warmth. You stand there for a moment, taking it in. The forgotten road is a teacher. It teaches patience, resilience, humility. It teaches that the journey is more important than the destination, and that the past is never really past. It is always there, just beneath the surface, waiting for us to remember. You make camp for the night, this time on a ridge overlooking the desert. The stars come out again, and you lie on your back, watching them. You think about all the people who have looked at these same stars from this same road. You think about the hope that carried them, the fear that haunted them, the strength that sustained them. And you think about the road itself, this forgotten line of human intention, still here, still waiting, still holding the stories of those who passed this way. Tomorrow you will continue. There is more to see, more to learn, more to remember. The road leads on through more canyons and dry lakes, past more ruins and graves, toward a destination that may not exist. But that is the point. The road is the destination, and as long as someone walks it, it will never be truly forgotten. The next morning you wake before dawn, the sky a deep indigo with a single bright star hanging low above the horizon. Your muscles ache from sleeping on the hard ground, but the ache is a good one, a reminder that you are alive and moving. You build a small fire, just enough to heat a cup of water and warm your hands. The coffee is bitter and strong, and it cuts through the cold. As the sun begins to rise, the desert comes alive with color. The rocks turn from black to brown to gold, and the shadows stretch long across the valley. You pack up your camp and step back onto the road. Today, the road leads into a narrow canyon, its walls steep and layered with ancient stone. The path follows a dry wash, and you can see where flash floods have scoured the canyon floor, leaving behind smooth cobbles and twisted driftwood. The road is barely visible in places, just a faint depression in the gravel, but you know it is there. You have learned to read the landscape, to look for the subtle clues. A row of rocks that was once a curb, a notch cut into a hillside, a line of creosote bushes that grows slightly taller where the soil was disturbed a century ago. As you walk deeper into the canyon, the walls close in and the air grows cooler. You notice markings on the rock faces, old and faded, petroglyphs. They are carved into the dark varnish of the desert patina, figures of animals and people, spirals and zigzags. You stop to study them. Some are thousands of years old, made by the people who lived here long before the Spanish or the Americans arrived. They hunted here, prayed here, told stories here. Their hands touch this same stone. You place your palm against one of the carvings, and for a moment you feel a connection across time, a thread that links you to an unknown hand that worked this rock. The canyon opens into a wide bowl and the road splits. One branch heads west, toward the distant mountains. The other branch swings south, toward a dry lake bed that shimmers in the morning heat. You check your map, but it is old and the details are faded. You choose the western branch, following a line of old telephone poles that once carried messages across the desert. The poles are leaning, some broken, the wires long gone. They stand like silent sentinels, marking the path of a former civilization. Ahead you see a cluster of ruins. It is a small settlement, not even a ghost town, just a handful of buildings that were never meant to last. There is a stone foundation, a collapsed roof of corrugated iron, a rusted water tank. You walk through the remains looking for clues: a broken plate with a floral pattern, a horseshoe, a leather glove stiff and cracked. You imagine the family that lived here, maybe a homesteader and his wife, trying to scratch a living from the dry soil. They would have hauled water from a distant spring, raised a few chickens, planted a garden that never grew. The loneliness must have been crushing. The silence must have been deafening. You sit on a piece of stone that was once a doorstep and you eat a simple lunch of crackers and dried fruit. The sun is directly overhead and there is no shade. The heat radiates from the ground and the air shimmers. You drink from your canteen, rationing the water. There is a spring marked on your map, about 4 miles ahead. You hope it is still flowing. The road continues across the plain, heading toward a low range of hills. The vegetation thins out and the ground becomes sandy. You are entering the heart of the Mojave, where the land is so dry that nothing grows but the hardiest of shrubs. The road is faint here, almost erased by the wind. You have to stop frequently to look for the next trace, a slight change in the color of the sand, a line of slightly larger rocks that someone piled up to mark the way. It is slow going, but it gives you time to think. You think about the people who built this road. They were not engineers or surveyors, not in the modern sense. They were ordinary men and women looking for a better life. They followed the paths of animals, then the paths of Native Americans, then the paths of earlier pioneers. They improved the trail, widened it, straightened it, but they never forgot that the road was a gift, a fragile thread connecting them to the rest of the world. They knew that without the road, they would be isolated, cut off from supplies and news and family. The road was their lifeline. The hills draw closer, and you see a notch that marks the pass. Road climbs gently, switchbacking up the slope. The sand gives way to gravel and the gravel to rock. You find yourself walking on a surface that is almost pavement, a natural deposit of caliche that has been packed hard by countless feet and hooves. The road is distinct here, a ribbon of white winding across the brown hillside. You follow it up, your breath coming faster in the thin air. At the top of the pass, you stop. The view is breathtaking. The desert stretches in all directions, a sea of earth and sky. To the west, you can see a range of mountains, their peaks still dusted with snow. To the east, the basin where you started this morning, a blur of hazy distance. The road descends into a valley that is greener than the others, a ribbon of cottonwood trees following a dry stream. There must be water there, a spring or a seasonal creek. You see the ruins of a large building in the distance, maybe a stagecoach station or a ranch. You descend carefully, the road steep and rocky. The sun is past its zenith, and the shadows are growing longer. You reach the valley floor and find the spring. It is a small pool, clear and cold, fed by a trickle from the rocks. You drink deeply and refill your canteen. The water is sweet, a taste of life in the midst of aridity. You sit by the pool and let your feet soak in the cool water. The cottonwood trees provide a rare shade and you lean back against a trunk, closing your eyes. For a while you do nothing but listen. The wind rustles the leaves. A bird calls. The water drips. It is a moment of pure peace. The ruins of the building are about 100 yards away. You walk over to explore. It is a large structure, built of stone and adobe, with a timber roof that has long since collapsed. The walls are still standing, though cracked and weathered. Inside, you find the remains of a fireplace, a hearthstone worn smooth by countless fires. There are shelves carved into the adobe, empty now. A piece of a blue ceramic dish lies on the floor. You pick it up and turn it over. On the back, you can barely make out the words, Wedgwood, England. This was a place of some refinement, a station where travelers could rest and eat a hot meal, maybe even spend the night. You imagine the stagecoach pulling up, the horses lathered and tired. The driver would shout, the passengers would climb down, stiff and sore from days of bouncing over rutted roads. They would stretch their legs, drink coffee, eat a meal of beans and bread and maybe some dried beef. They would trade news from the east with news from the west, swapping stories of gold strikes and land claims, of accidents and deaths. Then the coach would leave, a new team of horses hitched, and the station would be quiet again until the next arrival. Outside, you find a small cemetery, a dozen graves marked with wooden crosses, most of them fallen and rotted. One cross is still standing, the wood gray and splintered. You read the inscription, carved by hand, Sarah J. Miller, B. 1842, D. 1876, rest in peace. She was only 34. The cause of death is not given, but in this desert it could have been anything: childbirth, fever, an accident, a broken heart. You stand in silence for a moment, paying your respects. You decide to camp here for the night, near the spring and the ruins. The spot feels safe and sacred. You gather wood for a fire, dry branches from the cottonwoods. As the sun sets, the sky turns crimson, then purple, then deep blue. The stars come out one by one until the sky is alive with light. You sit by the fire, watching the flames, and you think about Sarah Miller. What was her life like? Did she come here with her husband, hoping to start a new life? Did she have children? Was she happy? You will never know, but her name is still here, carved into a piece of wood, and as long as someone reads it, she is not forgot. The night passes quietly. You sleep soundly, wrapped in your blanket, the sound of the spring a gentle lullaby. In the morning, you wake to the sound of a raven cawing. It is perched on the roof of the ruins, watching you with its black eyes. You wave and it flies off, its wings beating the still air. You feel a sense of gratitude for this place, for the shelter it offered, for the water it provided. You clean up your camp, leaving no trace. The road continues west, out of the valley and into another stretch of open desert. But before you leave, you take a moment to look at the map again. There is a note in the margin, written in pencil, so faint it is almost illegible. It says, "Abandon hope of water beyond this point." You feel a chill, even though the day is already warm. The map was made in the 1880s, and the note is a warning from a time when water was a matter of life and death. You look at the road ahead, a thin line disappearing into the heat haze. You have enough water for 3 more days, maybe 4 if you ration. The map shows a spring about 20 miles ahead, but it is marked doubtful. You decide to trust the road. You walk through the morning, the sun climbing higher and higher. The land is flat and barren, a vast playa of cracked mud and salt. The road is barely visible here, just a trail of darker soil winding across the white expanse. The heat is oppressive, and the glare off the salt is blinding. You put on your sunglasses and pull your hat low. You focus on putting one foot in front of the other. Around noon, you see something ahead, a dark shape on the horizon. It could be a mirage, but as you get closer, you realize it is real. An abandoned wagon, its wooden frame bleached by the sun, its iron wheels sunk into the salt. You approach slowly, as if entering a sacred space. The wagon is a ghost of the past, a relic of a journey that ended here. You look inside. There's a broken chest, a few scattered bones from an animal, a rusty shovel. There are no human remains, but you wonder if the people made it out or if they perished somewhere nearby. You sit in the shade of the wagon for a few minutes, eating a snack and drinking water. The silence is complete. No wind, no birds, no insects. Just the vast emptiness of the playa. You feel a profound loneliness, but also a strange peace. This is the desert in its purest form, a place where only the hard and the determined survive. You think about the travelers who came this way, some with hope, some with desperation. They all had to face this same emptiness, this same silence, this same question: will I make it? You stand and continue. The playa takes all day to cross. The sun moves across the sky and your shadow grows longer. You focus on a distant mountain, a flat-topped mesa that seems to float above the heat haze. The road aims straight for it, and that becomes your goal. Step by step, the mesa grows larger. You notice the ground changing, the salt giving way to gravel, the gravel to sand. You are leaving the playa behind. At the base of the mesa, you find a cairn. It is a pile of rocks, deliberately placed, with a small piece of weathered slate propped against it. You pick up the slate and read the words carved into it. "This road built by the sweat of men who believed in tomorrow. Do not let it die." There is no date, no name, just that quiet plea. You stand there for a long time, the slate in your hands. The message is from a person you will never know, but it reaches across the years and touches you. The road is not just a path. It is a testament to the human will to connect, to move, to build. And now you are part of that story. You are one of the people who walk this road, who keep it alive by remembering it. You carefully replace the slate, add another rock to the cairn, and continue. The road climbs the side of the mesa, a steep switchback that must have taken weeks to construct with picks and shovels and dynamite. You marvel at the workmanship, the way the road is carved into the slope, the drainage ditches, the retaining walls made of dry-stacked stone. These were not just laborers, they were artists, sculpting a path through the desert. Near the top of the mesa, you find a small flat area with a circle of stones, the remains of a campfire. Inside the circle, there is a rusted tin can and a piece of charred wood. You sit down and catch your breath. From this vantage point, you can see the entire route you have traveled, a faint line winding across the floor of the desert. It looks like a thread, fragile and easily broken, but it has held together for over a century. The sun is low now, and you decide to camp on the mesa. The view is spectacular. The entire western horizon is ablaze with color, the sky a gradient from deep blue to fiery orange. You build a small fire and cook the last of your beans. You drink the last of your coffee. Your supplies are running low, but you are not worried. The road will lead you to fuel and water, or it will lead you to the end of the line. As darkness falls, you look up at the stars. They are brighter here, away from the lights of civilization. You see the Milky Way, the same river of light that has guided travelers for millennia. You think about all the nights spent under these stars, all the fires that have burned on this mesa, all the stories that have been told. The road has witnessed it all. In the morning, you descend from the mesa and enter a wide valley. The road is well preserved here, a clear track of two parallel ruts. You follow it for hours, passing through fields of creosote and ocotillo. The air smells of rain, though the sky is clear. You notice fresh tire tracks on the road, not from a car, but from a mountain bike. Someone else has been here recently. You feel a pang of connection. You are not alone in remembering this road. The tracks lead to a cluster of buildings, a small settlement that is still inhabited. There is a gas station, a store, a few houses. You walk in and the owner looks up from his newspaper. He is an older man with a weathered face and kind eyes. He asks where you came from. You tell him about the road, about the ruins, about the playa. He nods. He knows the road. He tells you that his grandfather worked on it, building the section through the pass. He says that people used to travel it all the time, but after the highway was paved, it fell into disuse. Now, only a few hikers and bikers come through. You buy a sandwich and a bottle of water. The man tells you that the road continues for another 60 miles until it meets a modern highway. Some sections are gone, washed out, or overgrown, but in between, he says, it is still there, waiting. You thank him and step back out into the sunlight. The road lies before you, a line of dirt and gravel and memory. You know you could walk it all the way to the highway, then hitch a ride back to civilization, but you are not ready to leave. There is still more to see, more to remember. You walk on, past the settlement, past a small cemetery with headstones dating back to the 1860s. The road climbs a gentle rise, and at the top you see a sign. It's modern, posted by the Bureau of Land Management. It says, Mojave Road Historic Trail. Travel at your own risk. No services for 60 miles. You smile. The road is not forgotten. It is recognized, protected, remembered. The sign is a proof that someone cares, that the story is being preserved. You read the sign and then step off the road onto a faint trail that leads to a viewpoint. From there, you can see the entire length of the valley, the road winding through it like a ribbon of history. You sit on a rock and take out the badge you found days ago. You hold it up to the light. The corrosion is deep, but you can still make out the letters, Pony Express 1860, a tiny piece of a much larger story. You put it in your pocket, a talisman, a reminder that every journey is made up of countless small moments, each one precious. The sun is beginning to set. You know you should find a place to camp, but you stay on the ridge, watching the light change. The desert is quiet, except for the sound of your own breath. You feel a sense of completeness, of having walked a path that many have walked before, of having touched the past and brought it back into the present. Tomorrow you will walk the final miles. The road will lead you to the highway, and from there back to the world of phones and electricity and traffic. But a part of you will remain on this road, in the silence and the heat and the vast emptiness, because the road is more than a physical path. It is a story that continues to unfold. Every time someone walks it, every time someone remembers, the stars come out. The Milky Way arcs overhead. You lie on your back, looking up, and you think about all the people who have looked at these same stars from this same road. And you understand that the forgotten road is not forgotten at all. It is waiting. It has always been waiting. And as long as there are people willing to walk it, to listen to its stories, it will never truly disappear. You wake with the first light, the sky a pale wash of gray and rose. The stars have faded, and the air is cool, carrying the faint scent of creosote and dry earth. You pack your things, leaving no trace of your camp, and stand on the ridge one last time. The road stretches ahead, curving down into the valley, still faint but unmistakable. You take a deep breath and begin the final leg. The walking is easy now. The road is well defined, and the morning light softens the harshness of the desert. You pass through a grove of Joshua trees, their twisted arms raised to the sky like ancient supplicants. A jackrabbit bounds across the path and disappears into the brush. The world feels alive, even in its silence. You think about the message on the slate, about the man who built the road, about the people who traveled it. Their stories are woven into the very ground beneath your feet. Around midday, you reach a dry wash where the road has been washed out. You have to scramble up the bank and find the continuation on the other side. There, you notice a small metal object half buried in the sand. You dig it out, a rusted horseshoe, bent and worn. It could be from any era, any horse. You hold it for a moment, feeling the weight of time, then leave it where it lies. It belongs here. The road climbs again, this time through a narrow canyon. The walls are striped with layers of color, red, brown, yellow, gray. You touch them and they are warm from the sun. In the shade of an overhang, you find more petroglyphs, these ones deeper and older than the ones before. Spirals and handprints and figures that might be dancers or hunters. You wonder who made them, what they were thinking, what they hoped the symbols would say to the future. You move on. The canyon opens into a broad valley, and in the distance you see a line of green, the highway. There are cars moving, tiny specks of metal and glass. The road you've been following turns into a dirt track that leads to a metal gate. Beyond it, a paved road, a sign, a world of speed and noise. You stop before the gate, not yet ready to cross. You sit on a rock and look back. The valley stretches behind you, the road disappearing into the heat shimmer. You can almost see the ghosts of wagons and riders, the dust rising from hooves and wheels, the voices of men and women calling out to each other. The desert holds all of it, layer upon layer of pilgrimage and purpose. You take out the badge one more time, the Pony Express relic. It is more than a piece of metal. It is a symbol of a time when the connection between people depended on courage and endurance. The riders who carried the mail across this desert knew the road better than anyone. They knew the water holes, the passes, the dangers. They trusted the road, and the road carried them. You put the badge away and stand. The gate is unlatched. You push it open and step onto the pavement. The surface is hot and hard, a shock after miles of dirt and gravel. The highway is empty at the moment, a ribbon of asphalt waiting for traffic. You walk along the shoulder, and after a few minutes a truck approaches. It slows, and the driver, a woman with a sunburned face, asks if you need a ride. You say yes. You climb into the cab, and the truck smells of diesel and coffee. She asks where you came from. You tell her about the road, about the walk, about the message on the slate. She listens quietly and then says she has lived in the desert all her life, but she has never walked that road. She thanks you for telling her about it. The truck gains speed, and the desert blurs past. You watch the road recede in the side mirror, a thin line of dust that fades into the landscape. You know that tomorrow someone else will walk it, a hiker, a historian, a dreamer. They will find the cairn, the petroglyphs, the ruins. They will add their own small stone, their own story. The truck drops you at a small town with a diner. You go inside, order a meal, and sit by the window. Outside, the desert stretches to the horizon. The road is out there, waiting. You know you will return to it someday. But for now, you have walked it, you have remembered it, and you have carried a piece of it with you. The forgotten road through the Mojave Desert is not a relic of the past. It is a living thread, a connection between then and now, between those who built it and those who follow. It is a testament to the idea that every journey matters, every footprint leaves a mark, and as long as there are people willing to walk, to listen, to remember, the road will never be forgotten. You finish your meal, pay the bill, and step out into the fading light. The stars are beginning to appear. You look toward the desert and you smile. The road is there, quiet and patient, waiting for the next traveler. And somewhere, perhaps, a piece of slate with a carved play still stands at the base of a mesa, waiting for someone to read it and carry on.